Well, thank you very much, Pratyush, for this very kind and expansive introduction. Yes, I think I will come straight to my topic, but let me just say a few words about background. As you have heard, I've been mainly working on the Rai community, but I see more a study in Kiranti matters, in the Kiranti culture and literature. And so therefore I have moved a little bit in recent years from the Rai areas a bit further east to the Limbu area, and also beyond the border, as you just indicated. I also have now looked at this Kiranti culture on the Indian side, Darjeeling and in Sikkim. So also, as you just mentioned, this fellowship I was benefiting from in Delhi is also a background to this work, because I gave me an opportunity to focus on this aspect of my research, which has been accompanying me for quite some years, I have to say, but I haven't really published a book about it, and that's actually what I'm planning to do. That was the intention also in Delhi, to get a bit more feedback for the theoretical framing of the work on Pragunanda and the Satyahangma movement, which actually I started looking at when I was here together with Noel Kishore Rai and Vishnu Singh Rai, working on language documentation in the Eastern Hills, and I came across the importance of this movement. So that's just to stress that this paper I'm preparing here is meant as an introduction to the book which I'm working on. And so it has the intention to give the whole research a bit of more broader perspective in theoretical terms, but also in geographical terms, because I realize that many of the aspects of this research on the Satyahangma movement resonates with other movements in the whole subcontinent, not only in Nepal or the Himalayas. So this book is about the emergence of a new, what I would call ethnic religion in the region of eastern Nepal, which is known as the Satyahangma Panth, and came into being in the 1920s at the time of Rana autocratic rule. It was originally initiated and led by one man, and that is Pragunanda Lingen, and this is the major figure I'm talking about today, but also the impact he had on the history of Eastern Nepal. So I think many of you have seen this picture. Actually, it's based on the central photograph, which is almost the only photograph, but I'll show you another one as well. This is endlessly reproduced in books and journals, so we don't really have many more sources about how we look, but in this way he's very much present among his followers, and you see there's a lot of creativity flowing in how it's been depicted. So he was a charismatic guru, and today is worshipped as a kind of ethnic culture hero. The new creed he propagated can be described as a reformed version of the Limbu's indigenous or tribal, in quotation mark, religion based on the Mundum oral tradition. It has become popular not only among Limbu but also among the other Kiranti ethnic groups, and so today this can be seen as a modern version of Kiran religion. That's exactly also how it's depicted by certain groups, but this is also something which one has to, of course, see critically. Let me just come to the concept of Kiran religion, because that's at the background. If you look at the census, you see, and you will know that actually Kirat, since 1991, is a category of religion, of a dharma in the census, and this recent data has actually grown a little bit to 3.2%, which comes to about almost 1 billion in the contemporary, in the present context. So, of course, this is important, because before the other census data always classified the Kirat people as Hindus, because when census data came, they just looked and asked them, do we worship Shiva and Vishnu, and people just said yes, and so they were classed as Hindus, but eventually, and more in the course of time, people in the East classify themselves as followers of a Kirat religion. But now the question, of course, is what is Kirat religion? And there is a lot of debate about this going on. So this is what this paper is also about. But of course, I have to stress at this point that there is no consensus about this. The followers, the present successors of Pragunanda, claim to represent the Kirat Dharma, but of course it's only one section of the Kirati as a whole, and there are various versions of what actually Kirat Dharma can actually mean. So this is only focusing on the Satyahangma movement, and so I just want to stress that this is the larger context of what it's all about. So my book project is about a religious movement, a story of changing popular beliefs, and especially of reform of ritual practices. So that's why I kept the title also Ethnic Religion and also Religious Movement, because it is about revising practices, about sanitizing religion in terms of introducing new forms of worship, but especially having new norms like giving up blood sacrifice and drinking alcohol, which is one of the main important things which Satyahangma followers preach. So this is one of the questions I want to pose today. What is it really? Is it a new religion, or is it rather a religious movement, something which is very much in process? So that's the question I will come back at the end. First, let me introduce you to this phenomenon, because not everyone will know about Pragunanda. But actually, I think here in Nepal, that's the difference of being in Delhi, where I gave this paper last year. You will know that actually Mahaguru Pragunanda is one of the Rashtriya Vibhutis. He's a national luminary. That's an official title. There was a decision by the government cabinet on that in 2009, and significantly the 16th here is Mahaguru Pragunanda in this line, in this rather prestigious line, you could say, starting from King Janak, Gautam Buddha, and including, of course, many kings. Also one woman, Pasang Lamu Sherpa, was also ended shortly before Pragunanda, but he's, in a way, you could say, he's the representative, along with Pasang Lamu Sherpa, of the Janajati part of the population. So the question, of course, in my book project is who is this person? Historically, what do we know about him? What actually happened in the 1920s and 30s when he was actively roaming around in the eastern part of Nepal? Most of you will know that he, in a way, introduced his reforms, which are already indicated, ban on blood sacrifice, alcohol. So in a way, he was a modernizer, you could say. He also actually spread literacy by spreading the Kirati script and introducing a kind of written tradition. So that's the kind of program he had in short. But the book which I'm putting together is also not only about Pragunanda, that would be an important part, but it's also about the movement in the time after his death, which was 1949, just at the end of the Brahma times. The movement almost seemed to disappear, and there wasn't, when I started on this, there was hardly anything in the English academic literature about this movement, apart from saying that this movement somehow was there but eventually dwindled and almost disappeared. But this is not the case, because at least since the 1970s and especially since the 1990s, there is a successor who claims to be his successor, Atmananda Lingam, from the same clan in East Nepal, who is now, and I'll come to that in more detail, claiming to be the spiritual leader of this Kira Dharma. There had also been other claimants. There was one Jyotinanda, a Rai actually, who also could have, I'm not sure whether he actually did claim, but he was also seen by many as a reincarnation of Pagunanda. And there's another third one, Omnanda, who also at some stage at least claimed to be a reincarnation, but that's another story. He went into a different direction. So you can see that this new religion which came up in this movement is not very homogeneous, and that's part of my presentation here to show that it actually has had some divisions, and that unity played an important role, but actually what happened was often rather the opposite of that. So, as I already said, my intention here is to kind of present the major features of this movement and also put it into a broader perspective by comparing with other movements in the South Asian subcontinent. So my first part now, and I think I forgot to move to the second image. Many of you know this is Atmananda Lingden, the person who now leads the Satyahangma movement, actually calling it Kira Dharma, printing these red books, the Mundu books, brought out in Larumba in East Nepal, north of Damak, and he's, as I said, the main representative, but not uncontroversial. So let me focus now on Pagunanda and the historical person. I will just stress that he's really a kind of typical guru in a way that you can compare him with other gurus. He's called the Mahaguru, whereas Atmananda Lingden is called the Dharma Guru. So there's a distinction there, but otherwise they are seen in a direct line. He was a genuine religious person. And I would say he was a rather charismatic person, which had, as he had a large following. I'll just show you an image in a second. But at the same time, he had a political agenda which was very important at the time in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. My work so far on the biography of Pagunanda has relied on one important book by Hembade Bulung and Kudananda Dal, which is about the only source one has really on the historical figure. I've tried to also find other sources to relativize this rather hagiographic booklet by these two school teachers from Rabi, who still had first-hand knowledge about him. The book was first published in the 60s, but then I have only access to the version of 1990. But it's quite an interesting text, and it poses also many questions. So this is another of the many statues which are coming up now all over the place. This one is in the Pashpatinat area. In East Nepal you find many other memorials. I could have a whole collection of these. In Damak, and there's actually a part of the highway going up from Damak to Chilin. But let me just also mention at this point already that Pagunanda was not an entirely novel figure in the East, because as we will see, there are many parallels with another person from the Josmani sect, and that's an important aspect of his life story, that actually Pagunanda was initiated in the Josmani Parampara, and actually was very much affected by the religious ideas of this Sant or Bhakti movement, which also was very important in Eastern Nepal in the 19th century, and in a way paved the way, I would say, for the figure of Pagunanda. So that's why I put these two figures here side by side. But let me just give you some basic facts about the life for those who don't know much about Pagunanda. He was born in 1885 into a poor, relatively poor Hindu family. His narrative describes how he already in early years had certain signs of being kind of Jnani, was like called, a kind of spiritual being. He had fits in the forest. He had what you would describe as typical shamanic initiation experiences. And because it is said early on he was getting these fits, especially when somebody ate meat or drank alcohol, especially meat was something which he just could not stand, and he would, in a way, then become possessed by the deity, which became his spiritual inspiration. Yes, so that was, of course, we don't know what exactly happened, but these are the stories in the Jidani. But what is more factual and this could be verified is that he eventually left the village in East Nepal, the village of Tuchinamba, close to the Rabi in Ilam district, and because he wanted to see more of the world, and he was not satisfied in living in the village. So he went to Darjeeling, selling some chicken there, making some money, and eventually worked as a porter. Actually, also in the Young Husband expedition in 1903, 1904, he was one of the many porters and had some rather shocking experiences when some of his co-porters were swept away by avalanches and so on. So it was a pretty hard job, but he was lucky to survive. Then later he tried to meet his brother, who had become a soldier in the Gorkha army of the British, and that brought him to Burma eventually. And it is a strange kind of story of coincidences. He was eventually recruited. He didn't want to be recruited. He had no intention, but somehow it was taken to be because he had come on a train with this fellow traveler who had been a recruit, and so he had already benefited from the army, so he was seen as part of the transport, and so he was made a recruit and actually stayed there for quite some time. In the army, actually also went to France in the First World War later on, where he was shocked by the violence, and there are also little episodes about how he refused to shoot his enemies and just shot in the air because he could not see any reason doing this work of a soldier. But this whole period of his life is still not very clear, and still very many open questions. But finally, at least, he gets out of the army and goes back to India and travels around throughout the subcontinent as a sadhu, basically. On the way, he traveled all around to the south, to the north, but eventually came back to Nepal and decided to stay there and devote his life to the Limbu coast. Again, this is a turn of events which is not so clear in the biography of how actually this all came out, but at least by the 20s, when he was in his mid-30s, he devoted himself to the cause of the Limbu. And so this is a rather typical life story. I mean, if you read the story, it's quite nice to read, but it resonates with many other hagiographies. But it also shows that he was very much actually involved in the historical events of his time, and he had seen quite a bit of the world. He had been in Burma, and actually it was in Burma that he was initiated by Josmani. That's also explicitly stated in the biography, that he met a kind of not a disciple, but a disciple of Shashidhar, which was an early guru of the Josmani. So he was rather, when he came back eventually in Nepal, he roamed around, and here I'd like to show you this second, as far as I know, it's the only second photograph we have of Raghunanda. I cannot show you the whole one, but it did not quite fit. But you can see here in the middle, actually it's going further to the left side. He's quite the central figure here, sitting with his malas, surrounded by his chelas, chela Buddha. The right side, because you can see that there are also quite a few women in his following. And actually this gender aspect is also quite interesting, because also it's often stressed that he was neither a man nor a woman. He was having this kind of, I don't know how to designate it, by non-sexual or bisexual. Anyway, he was somehow beyond, and he dressed, as you could see in the earlier pictures, he had these big malas usually, which only are worn by women. And also other ornaments which are typical of Limbu women. Otherwise, he dressed in white always. So this is quite clear that he had here a rather aloof position, and that's also evident in other aspects. He was giving obligatory speeches. There's a whole series of recorded or written down, as it's called in the Musiba Khan. These are Akashvani's divinations which he gave. So he was a rather unique and rather, as I said, charismatic figure. Very few people which I did here who had still met him all agreed that he was a very imposing figure, very authoritative in a way, but always at the same time very soft-spoken. This is the kind of impression you get. So I think I should move ahead. But at this point, I would just like to stress, I won't elaborate on this, that actually, if you look at this kind of religious side of his personality, this kind of procession practices, this reminds you about other cases of Adivasi rebellion in India. For example, the well-known, well-described Santhal rebellion also was led by two persons who actually were possessed and were guided in their political activities by a spiritual being. So I think there are certain aspects which can be compared, but I won't do that here this evening. I just want to stress again, let's see, let's come back to that later. Another important point is, if you look at the other kind of subaltern rebellions which have been studied by members of the subaltern studies group, you could also see certain similarities in the way that the dominant order is kind of inverted. Especially you can see that in the Limbu language, which has been used by Raghunanda. I mean, he was only, of course, a speaker of the Nepali language after so long in the Gorkha army, but he only spoke in Limbu when he returned to the Limbu. And that was, of course, very much a part of his message. So you could, following Raji Bua, call this a kind of semiotic break, a reversal of the dominant discursive practices. But at the same time, and this is the whole ambivalence about it, which might be striking. And on the one hand, you have this very strong revivalist approach of reviving the Adivasi or the Janajati tradition of the Limbu and the Kirati in general. But at the same time, he had this reformist agenda, and this again is something you can also compare to other Indian movements of gurus, like in the Bhakti tradition, like Kabir, or that's more Pranat, in the Krishna Pranami movement, which has been studied by Gopal, links to Nepal, or even people like Vivekananda, origin of the Neo-Hindu movements, which also stressed education, which tried to find a new way of defining the religion, bringing in modern ideas which were important at the time. So, yes, so what I try to say here is that Padmananda was certainly a religious person. You cannot say that he was only an activist. He was clearly a thoroughly religious person, but at the same time had a rather radical program of political agenda. And so this is what I come in my next section. But to conclude here, I just want to compare him here with the current representative, Atmananda, whom I visited in Larumba a couple of years ago, and whom I found actually not as charismatic in a way. He's quite different as a character. I mean, as I already said, he's the Dharma Guru, which in a way, I'm not quite sure whether I understand why this distinction between Mahaguru and Dharma Guru, but in any case, he's married, and that's one aspect which is often stressed, that because Padmananda was not married, but his reincarnation is married, and so that there is a certain difference in these two generations. And also, I would say, whereas Padmananda was, of course, also involved in the political aspect, coming to that in a minute. Also, Atmananda is, in a way, also seen as a political figure, and I think he's still very powerful in terms of voting. At least that's what I hear. Anyway, but this is a changing time. He's more, I would say, he's more moderate in a way, appealing to the middle classes, and so I think he's adapted to these requirements of his time. But I should stress again at this point that Atmananda, in spite of claiming to be the reincarnation, is not accepted as a reincarnation at all. There are many who respect Padmananda, but not Atmananda, and there are also many Kirantis still nowadays who are followers of neither. So I should stress that in spite of the claim that they represent the Kirat Dharma as a whole, that's not really shared by everyone. So let me now come to my second point, the ethnic resistance and politics behind this movement. And I think that's something which is also probably widely known. I have not to go too much into details here, but it was important when Padmananda was moving around, and he was always moving around. I should stress, he never stayed in one place. He had various places where he did stay. He had a kuti up in Silauti, where he was in the hot season. He went down to Chuksanamba, to his birthplace, in the cold season, but otherwise he was always on the move. And he was, as I should have mentioned also, the image I showed earlier with his following, that was on one of his Himalayan pilgrimages when he went up to Kanchenjunga and really went into the upper altitudes, nowadays we would say close to the base camp, but anyway, in the snowy areas, he also liked to move around quite a bit. But let me come to his political agenda and the background. For one, he was, I think, a unifier, because he always spoke about the Kiranti, and I think in the current context that's quite important. He never saw himself only as a leader of the Limbu. He was a Limbu, but he always saw himself as a leader of the Kiranti as a whole, and also among his stela there were quite a few Rai, and actually I have recently found a list of his main chelas, and there were also some Tamang and Guruman among them, so he had a large following, and the concept of Kiranti was very apparently rather broad. But let me come to his political agenda. I think it's generally known that he was very much fighting for the maintenance of the Kibat system, which was at the time in the 1930s and 30s a big issue. As you know, and I just refer to Lionel Kaplan's classical study on the indebtedness of limbos in eastern Nepal and their increasing dependence on Barn or high-caste Sahus, which made them lose much of their land. That was just a time when apparently this became more and more of a problem in this area. And so actually the political background of his movement is that when Pagunanda exhortated, asked, or I mean basically demanded from his followers that they stop eating meat and stop drinking alcohol, this was basically in order to make them not further impoverished, and basically what he promised, and that was his kind of vision, was that they would retain all their lost Kipat lands and become the owners of their ancestral lands again when they follow his path. And there's the famous meeting in 1931 in Silauti Danda, and you might know this is a hill, a central hill, just between Ilam. You pass by when you go from Ilam towards Pidim and further up to Teratum. This is a very centrally located hill.
We just lost power, so I think
okay. Yeah.
generation give up.
So okay, so important is just that there was this meeting of the Das Limbu, the 10 Limbu chiefs from all the whole area, from the Tamil, Koshiyar, and from the east and west. And at that meeting, which continued for several days, they decided basically, and that was mainly the achievement of Pagunanda, that he could get a kind of promise from all these chiefs that they would follow his demand, which was not only about meat and alcohol, but it was also about giving up certain practices which were costly. It was also about giving up price practices which were reaching a certain problematic level among the Limbu, that there was more and more of a demand and competition in giving and accepting bright prices and also partly dowry. But basically it was an attempt to cut down on expenses on rituals, you could say. So it was a kind of de-ritualization, which was the result of this Yaktum Chumlung Satyahangma Panth, which was the kind of decision which came out of this meeting. So yes, so this is a clear political agenda behind it. They want to get back their Kipat land and regain the control over Kirat, the Kirat area, Limbuan, and the right territories. So that's, I think, quite well known. That's why he moved around to convince all his fellow people, fellow Limbus and Rais. But there was another activity which also had a certain political impact, was the building of temples. And that's something which is actually still very important nowadays, because these manhim, as they're called, or mankim in Rai, manhim in Limbu, are something which are still springing up all over the place. It's something which have not existed in traditional Kirat culture. There is no concept of a temple, because all the rituals which are done are either in open air contexts or they are done in domestic contexts in the house. But these manhims were one thing which Pagunanda started and which have been continued by various other followers. Yes, we're back here, yeah. Okay, so this is just the Silauti, famous Silauti Dara, where actually he also went, at the time of his death, he went back up to the hill. Shortly before reaching the top, there's a kuti where he meditated, and there's also still the temple which he built is up there. And also at the very top there's also his tomb, his samadhi, guarded by some military personnel there, and also you see his image there. So it's become somewhat of a pilgrimage place by now, but it's not, I think, that well known, so it's not really overrun by pilgrims, but it's an important place, and I think it will probably continue to become important in the future. Yes, now just come to these temples. Now this is one Manhim, this is the one in Larumba, and the inside, this is something, I'm not sure how familiar you are with this. These are typical Manhim shrines. It's not a murti, it's called Muchotum in Hindu, but it's basically, I would call it, it's a pyramid structure, or it could be compared to a chaita perhaps, but it's clearly not a murti because it's part, and here you see the Joshmani background, it's actually a Nirguna Bhakti shrine, which is abstract, which does not represent a particular divinity, even though that's something to be argued also, as I come to show in a second. So these are in his lifetime, and in the Jivani, which exists by Nadal, there are I think 6 or 7 which have been built during the lifetime of Bhagavananda himself in 1949 until 1949. But now I haven't really counted them, but now it's well over 100 which you find in eastern Nepal and also in Darjeeling. I think I'm more than happy. Sure. Running out of time. Now this is, I think, a typical process. I don't want to go into details. That the appropriation of space in a way through temple building is something which kings in South Asia have done for centuries. So this is a rather typical process. That by this it's a sanctification of space, but also in a way a political signal. It's also a form of community making. This is an image I took during the major festival, which is the Janma Jayanti, the birthday celebrations in November, 25th November, 11th November, the 25th of month here, when the birthday is being celebrated, and here usually a big home fire is being done, which is also part of the ritual program. So community making is certainly also part of it, because all of these manhim also have a place for fire sacrifice, and that always goes together. I just mentioned already that this has also spread across the border, and this just to illustrate this with this map. You can see that the heartland of Bhagavananda's activity is here on the Nepal side. Around, you see Silauti Hill is here central, Rabi, close to Rabi is his birthplace. Larumba is where nowadays Atmananda is active. But also in Philin, there's also a big manhim, the Sumatlum on the Dada in Philin. But also you have followers, and that's something I looked at just 2-3 weeks ago when I went to Baspote, which is a small village just across the border from Nepal to India, belonging to Darjeeling. And there are several villages where you also find followers of the Satyahangma Panth. Also in Sombare, which is across the Rangit River, here in Sikkim, on the Sikkim side, you find quite a few followers. And this shows also that even in Darjeeling Bazaar, where you did not find followers directly of Satyahangma, but you also find the manhims. Here, it's not very old. It was built in the 1990s, completed in 2000. but it's on the Mahakal hill, the central shrine in the center of Darjeeling. And here it's called Kirati Limbuhang Sarvajanik Manghim, and it's actually they call it a Yuma temple. And you see, so it's the same structure, the same shrine inside here, and you also see there's the picture of Pagunanda also inside this building, but it's not. I have to stress a Satyahangma shrine, at least by those who have designed it. It is for Yuma, and there things get a bit complicated because on the Indian side of the border, Yuma has become the central figure, and also this has spilled over in a way also from India back into Nepal. There's much of a debate going on there whether Yuma should also become a central figure in this new Kirat Dharma. But this is just yes, one aspect I want to stress here. But just to show about these political aspects of how this religion has developed, you all know that here in the Kathmandu Valley there is also a manghim in Hatibang, Sarno Hatibang, just outside the ring road, and there rather than in Darjeeling where you have actually there's a manghim, and another just beside this is a Kirat Kambu temple. So the Rai have a separate temple in Darjeeling, but here in Nepal the situation is different. Here you have this manghim, and inside you have 4 shrines for the 4 different Kirati communities. You have the pyramid Muchotlung for the Limbu, you have the Chula, the 3 hearthstones for the Rai, and then there's also a shrine for the Sunbar and also for the Yaka. So this is, you see, quite a different concept of Kirati religion on the Nepal side. So you see that's why the whole politics of temple building is not so unimportant. I will just now come, but I try to cut this short so we have enough time for discussion. The third point I want to stress, but maybe this is something I don't have to go in much detail here, is that in this movement of the Satyahangma Panth, the writing is important. It has the script use of the Srijanga or Kirati script is important. There's a story also in the Jivani, in the biography of Pagunanda, that he discovered that script in 1941. But of course we know that the script had already been propagated by Iman Singh Chenchong long before that, and it's not really clear how these events related. I'm quite sure that Pagunanda must have known about Chenchong's activities in Darjeeling, even though he doesn't refer to it. So we have this nice kind of discovery stories, how he discovered these letters in a cave, which is actually not impossible because the Srijanga script goes back to the 18th century. It was invented by this Sikkimese monk who was killed as a seditionist. So there are stories that he also had moved around and that he left some of these inscriptions, which probably or possibly have been then discovered by Pagunanda. Anyway, it was kind of topic at the time that this indigenous script of the Kirati had to be revived, and it was used also as part of the educational program. And this again, here I could also make reference to comparative, similar events in other parts of South Asia. Again, the Santals had a script. The Santal script has a rather similar story, where also the script is regarded as something not only instrumental, but it's something sacred, which is very much linked to the ancestral identity. Also among the Sora, you have even very similar stories about discoveries of the script in caves, So it's not something men have invented, but it's rather something which has been given from times beyond. So this is an important part until now, and this is the Kirat Samjing Mundum, which is printed in Damak, issued from Atmananda's followers in Larumba. This is, in a way, you could say, the Red Bible of the Satyahangma Panth, which you find also being used in the Indian context. But of course, this is only one version of the Mundum, and I should stress, and I'm happy that Bibi Angbong is here, who just brought out the Yaktung Samjing Mundum, which is a different version of the Mundum, which is not part of this line. So I maybe should just mention that the scripturalization of Fagunanda's words are still little studied, or almost not studied at all, because Fagunanda was himself speaking in Limbu, but as far as I know, he hardly wrote anything. He propagated the script, but as far as I know, there are no original writings, or very few, perhaps letters, I think must exist. But he preached, but there were his main chelas. Bhadrinanda was one, and Rana Doj another one, but actually also others who wrote down what he was saying and preaching, and also his oracles, his divinations have been written down. So there's a whole body of literature in Limbu script about him, about his preaching. But again, it's not a coherent source. So there's still much philological work waiting to be done on this. But I think I'll leave it at that point with stressing this importance of the script. Clearly, it's an important process which you also find in other areas, that an oral tradition is being converted into a written tradition. And so this is a process you can see here more or less in the making, because in the last decades you have seen a whole booming literature, not only religious literature, but ever since the Kirati script was brought out, was also used, making use of the Unicode font. It became much easier to print books, and so you have now a very expansive literature in Limbu script, which is still, I think, also understudied, I would say. So I think I should come to a conclusion, or at least to some final statements. I think it became clear that this is a complex movement. It's you can describe it as a reform movement, but at the same time I have also described it as an ethnic religion, and so this brings out various different aspects. I think if you focus on the movement, this is something which shows it's rather something which is still incomplete, which is process, and I think that's very much the case, because many of these things are still on the move. There's still debates going on, which is the right text to use and which is the right rituals to follow. But on the other hand, it's also and maybe that's mainly the self-representation. It's an ethnic religion, a new religion, even though that's also being debated. I think many of those followers would not say that it's new, because they rather see it as a long tradition. But as a scholar and as a researcher, I still think it's something which is in the making. And just to sum up my major points, I think one feature was, which I tried to point out, the charismatic guru, which has been important in this movement. That's one thing, which also you find in many similar movements. And then the second point is that it's a political movement. It has a certain political agenda, even though it is also having a religious form, which is not a contradiction. Here, I think what is important is that it's also a form of community making, that nowadays I think this movement going back to Fagunanda, stresses the unity of Kiranti, which is very much different if you go to the Indian side of the border, because where actually, I should also stress that Fagunanda as a figure is very little known in India. You find these temples, which they are, and there's the Yumaism, the movement of Yuma, but it's not linked to Fagunanda, surprisingly, even though I think historically it can only be going back to Fagunanda, but somehow this has been erased, at least this is my suspicion, that this is something modern. It stresses the aspect of education, and also especially also girls' education, which has ever been since Fagunanda's time an important aspect, that girls should be treated equally to boys, also get education, and it's also very much still on the agenda of, if you hear sermons by Atmananda and others. So yes, so these are the major aspects, and now I think it would be nice to hear your comments. As I said, it's an ambivalent movement in many ways. It has both these aspects of ethnic religion, which stresses rather the local, and after all, it's an ethnic religion, and I use that term because so far it is still a religion of the Rhine, limbo of the Kiranti. It's not a religion which anybody could follow. But on the other hand, you have this kind of universalist tendencies, and maybe it changes at some point into a more universal religion, because it has this modernizing aspects of becoming a modern and somewhat sanitized religion, which can also be practiced, for example, in the diaspora in England, in America, where, as far as I hear, it is also quite popular. So thank you for listening, and I think I should have seen also, this is my last.
Thank you, Martin. Before I open the floor for discussion and comments and questions, I was just wondering, the group photo that you showed us, do you have a date for it approximately, and where it was taken, and also where did you find it?
Well, it's yeah, it's a good question. The date seems to be quite. It's I can say that it's given. I have it from a publication from Larumba. So I assume that it's in the possession of the Larumba people, because when I was in Fidin a few years ago for the Janma Jayanti celebrations, they actually displayed that as a kind of relatively new finding, because I think it was discovered maybe only a couple of years ago, and so they gave it a frame with malas and so on. And actually then they made also buttons with this new image, because so far you only had this one photograph, and now we had a second one, so now we have a new kind of media reproduction coming up through that. It's 1938, so it's a kind of peak time of this Himalayan Jatras. He did several to the Kanchenjunga area, but that was one of the major ones with all these followers. So
where was
quite interesting.
So the location would be where? Or
they say it's Paktalung, which is one part of the Kanchenjunga area, but I'm not sure whether they can further locate it. But it's from the environment, they say it must be somehow about 3,000-4,000 meters at least up there. But it's actually it's a photograph. I really think it should be studied by historians of photography, because
that's right.
Because actually, and maybe we talk about that later. I have no idea who took the photograph. It's a fairly good photograph. This one I just got recently from publication from Larumba, which is fairly high quality. So I will try to identify some of the chelas, because now I have various small biographies of chelas, of his major disciples. So some of them probably can be identified, who survived him, and have been interviewed. There's a booklet about chelas giving accounts by their life.
Devendra Packer is suggesting maybe some photographer from that studio, from Darjeeling, might have been invited to
That could be, yeah, from Darjeeling. From Darjeeling.
Yeah.
It must have been a professional photographer because it's quite big.
That's what I
Actually, I have it with me if anybody wants to see it in this publication. It's really.
See. Yeah, well, we can look at it later. It's here. This one.
Yeah.
So it's fairly large. I mean, these old techniques where you had these huge plates, you had to carry up the cameras, the little kgs. Yeah.
So अब यहाँहरुको प्रश्न उत्तर if you want to start के रे तपाईलाई नेपालीमा सोध्न मन छ भने नेपालीमा पनि सोध्नु होला मैले नेपाली बुझ्नुहुन्छ आवश्यक पर्यो भने म अङ्ग्रेजीमा ट्रान्सलेट पनि गर्छु
धन्यवाद मार्टिन सर।